Hello and welcome to a very special How I Paint Things. Now what I've got whizzing around in front of me today is an American soldier from World War II, and that's something that I've covered on the channel a few times before. However, not too long ago, the army painter came along with a set of historically inspired paints, and they asked me what I thought. I had to play around with them and I thought they were pretty cool, but I haven't really touched on them on the channel itself. A common question that I see in places like Reddit and Blue Sky is folks asking, how do I use the historical paint sets? What am I going to do to get the most out of them? So that's what I'm going to do today. Everything you see here, with the exception of course of the dirt and the grass, is all from the historical American World War II paint set. There's a little bit of mixing involved, and this is going to be a slightly longer video than usual because I am going to go quite in depth into mixing and thinning your paints and so forth. So if you've never done anything like this before, here's where to start. All of the paints will be listed in the description below. They all come out of the one box. So let's keep things simple and get started. So once you've got your miniature assembled, the first thing to do is to go ahead and prime it. Now, if you've never come across this before, the purpose in priming a miniature is not just to make it a different color, but primer will give acrylic paint something to stick to rather than trying to grip onto plastic, because acrylic being water-based, plastic being very not, they don't always play nicely together. And a good primer will help your paint stick and work quite nicely as an undercoat for whatever colors you're going to put on top. Now that's the reason why I've used here ash gray. Under most circumstances, I would probably prime my American troops with something like skeleton bone because it's a lighter, more warm sort of looking color. But because of the fact that ash gray is a really good general purpose sort of primer, this is what I'm going to use just to show you that you can use something other than, air quotes, the correct stuff, and still get a really good result. Now we'll start by laying down the base coats for his skin, which is where I tend to find it's easiest to begin most sort of human figures, because it's the lowest part of the miniature, and everything else that we're painting on top is going to go down like layering up clothing over the top. Nice and simple. What I'm starting with, though, is a little bit of rifle brown, just a wee dot of that, and then some rosy skin next to it, because what I want to show you is how to mix paints. Now, this might seem like painting 101, but if you've never done it, it can be a little daunting. The idea is that instead of just blorping one color straight on top of the other from the bottle, where you're going to have no control over what you've got, put them next to each other with a little bit of distance, and then a wee bit at a time, just start mixing in one color into the next. Now, I don't want to change this rosy skin very much. I just want to make it a little darker, a little bit more warm, because rifle brown has a nice reddish tint to it, which is going to be really handy. I think about half and half will work as a base coat for our skin. Now you don't need to do this. You could just lay down a couple of coats of barbarian flesh or rosy skin, whatever you're using. But this, I think, is going to give us a nicer depth of color. So adding just a tiny touch of water off my brush as well. And then when you've got a clean brush, you don't want to load up with the whole thing covered in paint. Just about yay much will do you fine. And we'll start applying this over the skin. And you'll see by adding a little bit of a darker color into our base coat, it'll actually cover a wee bit more nicely over gray or even a black if that's what you're priming with. All the same, if you do notice that once you've gone over it once, you got a little bit of that gray still showing through, let this dry and then go ahead and apply a second coat. Now, like I said, you'll still see a little bit of the primer showing through in most cases. So once that is dry, a second coat will cover that over. What you don't want to do is just overload your brush and chuck non-stop paint onto a flat surface, because what's going to happen is the little bits of paint that dry, when you put wet paint over the top of them, they're going to lift up and you'll get kludgy, awful, textured mess. So make sure each stage is thoroughly dry before you're painting over the top of it. Now, if you want to be tricky, grab yourself a smaller brush, so size 1 or something similar, and a little bit of matte white. And what I'm going to do here is just blorp in the teeth on this fella. And if I make a mess, what I can do is go back to the base coat on my palette while it's still wet. Oh dear. And I'll be able to tidy this up. So just grabbing a tiny wee bit of that skin tone again. Now before moving on to the next step, it's an opportune moment to show you about thinning your paints. Now you can use water for this. I like to keep a little dropper bottle handy, which has got fresh water in it all the time. And the same as when mixing paints, don't just drop a huge dollop of it into the paint spot that you've put down. Pop it off to the side. So a wee little dollop on my palette there that'll barely show up on camera. Then dip your brush into it, because you really just want to make the tip of the brush wet. And you can start teasing out until you've got the consistency that you want. Now the question is always going to be how much water. And the short answer is it's going to change depending on the color that you're using, sometimes the manufacturer. Every paint is going to be a little bit different. I will tell you from experience, just a touch thicker than you might think is usually going to be better than too thin, because you'll lose control of too thin and that can be a bit messy. So with my thinned out paint, this is Rosy Skin again. I'm going to get just a little bit of it on my brush, and this time I'm looking to avoid the recesses. So in between his fingers, up here on his face, I've already sort of hit him a little, but around his nose, leave those hollowed bits the darker color. Cheeks and what have you, we're going to paint in nice and bright. Backs of his hands and what have you, just leave a little bit of depth to our skin tone here. You'll see there's actually very little of that base color that we applied first still visible, but that's fine. That's what we want, is just to add a little bit of extra depth. Once we shade over the top of this stuff later on, that's going to look a lot more vibrant. Now what I've done is the same thing again here on my palette. I've mixed in some boot brown and leather brown to make a slightly darker brown, and I'm going to apply this over his trousers. Now you'll see that this miniature here, the Warlord Games Plastic Americans, they come with pockets on the sides of their thighs. And strictly speaking, they should be painted green. Now, woodland camo is the color that I would use if I was going to do it that way. But trying to stick to just what's in the set here, then mixing these two together for our base coat is going to give us just about the perfect color for the trousers. It does involve a little bit of extra knife work, cutting the pockets off and smoothing them out. But a lot of metal figures that you'll find out there, they will come without the pockets anyway. And it's a bit of good practice. Now, for the fussiest little bit of extra painting you can do, what I have is some dark olive. And I'm going to pop this on the shirt he's wearing. And that's it. You can quite happily skip this. Nobody's really going to notice if you haven't painted their shirts in underneath the jackets, but I like to do it. Now we can finally start applying the medium drab, which will be the color of his jacket. Now this stuff would fade relatively quickly once it was out in the field, so if you want to mix in lighter colors or even use a lighter color to start off with, you can do, but medium drab is good for your fresh recruits or guys who've just been lucky enough to get a fresh jacket. Now if you can, and don't worry too much if you do hit the webbing, but if you can avoid it, just try not to touch the webbing on his chest and pack and all that sort of stuff at this point. Now for demonstration's sake, you can also paint his gaiters in that color, and that'll be accurate, but what I have got here is half and half. This is canvas mixed into medium drab, and this will be a little more accurate. So a quick blast of this over the gaiters. And this mix is going to come up again later in our painting process. Alright, now we're getting somewhere. What I'm going to do is pop him aside for a second, because let's get fussy. Now for his webbing, what you could use, if you're looking at sort of Normandy onwards, then you're going to start to see a lot of olive drab. This is also in the historical paint set as light drab, so you'll have it if you've got the American paint set. However, because I've gone for the brown trousers and a slightly earlier look, what would also be visible throughout the war, but would be a little less common as time went on, is a sort of faded yellow webbing. And what we're going to do is mix that up. So for expediency, if you just want to use one color straight from the pot and you're looking at Normandy onwards, green, nice and simple. However, let's be fussy. And on my palette, I'm going to get a little bit of canvas. Just a wee dollop of that. And then what I have, this is Daemonic yellow. In the American set, it is Life Vest yellow. So once again, you're going to have it. This time, we're going to mix this a little more carefully because we don't want this to completely overpower our canvas. So I've just dabbed a tiny wee bit of water into my brush here. Pick up a little bit of yellow, and really a little bit of this at a time. Now I'd say this is probably about 3 parts canvas to 1 part of the yellow, but you can eyeball this yourself. Once you're satisfied with your mix, go ahead and start applying it over his pack and his webbing. Now this is definitely one that's going to require 2 coats, so this is where something like a wet palette will come in handy. People ask quite regularly, do I need one? Short answer is no, but they are nice to have. So if you've got space on your hobby desk for them, I do recommend. I certainly like having one myself. Now, if you're anything like me, you'll probably end up with a few spots on the jacket where you sort of splurge over. Don't worry about it. We're going to tidy those up as a final step, because if I make any more mistakes from this point on, I don't want to have to keep going back to the same colors. So I have now boot brown, and I'll let you guess what we're going to paint with this. So here's boots, and as well, because this is a nice warm reddish leather color, I'm going to quickly blast this across the strap on the front of his helmet. Then with rifle brown, I'll let you guess what we're going to paint with that. Obviously this is the M1 carbine, but wood is wood. So as well as this fella obviously carrying the carbine, I am going to use this to paint in the wood on the handle of his entrenching tool here. Now for the strap on the carbine, what we're going to use is canvas. Again, no mixing, hooray. If you are doing a leather strap, then a little bit of boot brown will work just fine here instead. Now we're going to spin him around, and the strap across the back of his helmet, which is actually holding the liner in, I'm going to paint this in Paratrooper tan. Now don't paint your paratroopers in Paratrooper tan, it's just a name. Now there are a few bits that are going to be black, and for this, well, black comes in the set. Now, I tend to like doing the metalwork and what have you on my weapons in black first. Some folks like to do them in steel, gunmetal. It's up to you which direction you take. As well, on his pack here, he's got this little bit of the shovel showing. So I'm going to hit that with a little bit of black too, being careful here. And the cap on his canteen as well. Once you've laid that down, just a little bit of steel on the edge of your brush here, and you can dab along the edges of the gunmetal stuff and leave just a little bit of black behind. And then to finish off the base coats, what I have is dark drab, and this is going to be his helmet color. Now this one is also just dark Feldgrau from the German set, so going slow when you come up against the straps that you've already painted. It's a little bit easier than to try and paint a straight line across an already green helmet. Once I'm finished with this though, and I'm satisfied that the color is nice and solid, I'm going to go back with the medium drab, tidy up his jacket and any other little bits of the base coats that I need to, and get him ready for his wash. I've mixed up just a little bit of black and white to make some grey, and I'm going to paint about half of the protruding cigar with this, then a little bit of red, and as close to center as I can get it, just a little dot of yellow. That'll do. Now when your base coats are all dry and you're finished with any tidy up that you need to do, it's time to apply a wash. Now if you've never come across them before, a wash is still it's an acrylic paint, but it has a very different flow medium in there. So instead of being a solid color, what we get instead is this kind of filter effect that flows into the recesses and gives us loads of shading. Now what I'm going to do, this is the brown tone, and I am going to be quite careful in how I apply this. Ordinarily, if you can thin it down with a bit of quick shade medium or similar, then you can be a little bit more generous in how you apply it. But because it's quite strong, and it will stain the surfaces of whatever it's applied to, you want to be a little more careful with it when you're applying it neat. So it's not too difficult though. All you're doing is just running your brush over those surfaces, and you see how it runs straight into all of the recesses. Gives us a wonderful three-dimensional effect. So I'm going to go over everything except for his skin with this. And it'll take me a little bit of time because I am going slow. But once I'm finished, we'll leave this to dry for about half an hour. In some areas, it's a little easier to apply because you can be a bit quicker in how it goes on. But any big clumps, just shift it with your brush until it settles and looks a little more natural with how it goes on. This is a skill to practice, the same as anything else, so don't start with your officers and what have you. Let's say, have a bit of a play around with your basic infantry first, or fellas you're not too worried about if you've got to do a little bit of extra tidy up. Now, I would ordinarily suggest let that dry thoroughly before applying this next wash, but I'm in kind of a hurry here. So, what I have, this is warm skin shade, and I'll let you guess what we're going to apply that to. Same procedure applies, just pop it on lightly, guide it towards the edges, don't let it clump up anywhere too heavily. And while you've got it on your brush, you can kind of guide it out of his mouth and away from those teeth that we whitened up earlier. So once that has dried, you'll have something that looks like this. Loads of depth, loads of shading, and you could pop them on the table like this quite happily. The thing is that shades and washes tend to dry a little bit shiny, as you can see. So ordinarily what I would do from this stage is to do my highlights and what have you before varnishing. However, it's a little bit tricky to see on camera what we're doing with that gloss reflecting so much of the light. So what I'm going to do is to matte varnish him now. I would say leave this as a final step for painting at home, but for this case, I just gotta. So I'm going to take him outside and hit him with a matte varnish spray. Now there's a difference that a good varnish makes. We can crack on now with some highlights though, and I'm going to start off with some leather brown. Just water down a little, same as always, and I'm going to pop this over his trousers. Now, because we have used a mixed version of this to start off his trousers, I'm actually just going to use a little bit of this to paint along the edges and creases of his trousers rather than the whole thing. What I'm going to use this for is to add a bit more depth. This is a matter of taste and style, really, and how you like to paint clothing will just develop over time. So I'm not going to bother with going back to my mixed color here. Just adding a little bit of this. Keep your paint nice and thin. And like I said, just a tiny wee bit on your brush at a time, so you've got plenty of control. Now on his jacket, we're going to do something slightly different, where I have medium drab again, and I'm going to thin this down, tiny bit of water so it flows off my brush, same as we have been the whole time. And what I'm going to do now is to kind of catch the flatter areas and the high points and leave just the shaded stuff in the recesses. Now this will be quite subtle at first, and because we have used a relatively careful application of the strong tone or brown tone, it's not going to change up the color a huge amount. If you want to save some time, you can probably skip this stage. It's really not that necessary, but it's not going to take long. But it will look nice. You know, it's something you can skip if you want to save some time. And then we've got that half and half canvas and medium drab mix again. And this time we're going to concentrate on the edges, same as we did with the leather brown from the trousers. So just a little bit of this, the high points of creases. It will look pretty sharp going on, but it will darken down a little as it dries. All the same, you don't want to completely overwhelm this. So take your time here, and anywhere that you want a slightly sharper edge or a slightly faded sort of finish to the khaki, add a little bit of this with your brush here. I'm going to turn again here to canvas. And you'll see I've already been attacking the pack with this. And just a little bit of this at the edges of your yellowish webbing will do the job. This will make this look quite faded, which is great for sort of in the field, having seen a bit of sun. At the same time, you can also use that canvas to highlight his gaiters and the canvas strap on his rifle, or M1. What I've done here is to mix a little bit of white into some of the skin tone from earlier. And you want to be careful adding white to skin because it will start getting chalky real quick. So just a tiny wee dab of this. And then what you want to pick out is his nose, his chin, cheekbones. And you don't need to do a lot of this because that shade that we applied is going to carry quite a bit. As well, just little bits of this across the back of his knuckles to give his hands a bit more shape. And that, as they say, is that. Now, I quite like painting faces myself, and I do suggest it's a skill that you want to practice, because if you're painting World War II guys, or anything with a face really, there's a whole lot of character that gets pulled through there. Now, you can do little things like highlighting the edge of the wood or what have you, but I think that's plenty of work for the finish that I want to achieve. Now, while it isn't strictly related to the painting, what I'm going to do is quickly show you how to pop the decals or transfers on these guys. Now, they are tiny, which makes this a little bit tricky, but what I'm going to show you, this here, is way easier than trying to pop them in a bit of water with some tweezers. This is just ordinary kitchen towel, and I am going to wet it from behind with my little bottle of water. Soak it in thoroughly, and what's going to happen then is that the decals sitting on top of it are going to soak up the water through their backing paper and be sitting on somewhere damp that I don't have to worry about leaving them sitting there because they're not going to float off or disappear into the corner of a jar of water. So I'm going to let these guys sit there for about 30-40 seconds. And intermittently, with a wet brush, you can just wiggle and see if they're starting to come loose. You don't want to have to fight them. You know, if you're having to really shove the decals with your brush, they're not ready to come off. So just give them a little bit longer. Now, once they start moving a little freely, what you do is push the decal to the edge of the transfer, so it's kind of overlapping onto the paper. Get your brush under it, and hold it on the tip of your brush. It can be a little tricky, but get your brush where you want the transfer to be and pop it down. Give it a second there to settle. Now, because of the backing paper, it's not going to perfectly take the shape of the sleeve straight away, but we've got a trick for that. And there's two magic products, Micro Set and Micro Sol. Now, Micro Set, I'm just going to pop a little bit of this onto the decals. And once that has had a little chance to sort of seep under where I want them to stick, I'm going to leave this in the sun to dry for a little bit. Now, as they dry, transfers will typically sort of shrink and tighten a little bit against the surface that they're applied to. So they'll start taking the shape of the sleeve underneath. But while Micro Set is the glue, basically, Micro Sol, solvent. What this is going to do is help dissolve the backing paper and help those transfers take the shape a little bit more. So just a couple of quick passes with your brush. You don't want to be too rough with this, because what will happen is you'll either tear the paper completely or just lift them off. But give them a couple of passes like this, and then once again we'll leave them in the sun. Now, if you're still not getting your transfers taking the shape of the sleeve or the armor, whatever it is you're applying them to, you can keep adding layers of microsol to soften up the decal and make it softer and take the shape what's beneath. Just don't throw huge amounts on at a time. Then at last, once that has dried, I'm going to go ahead and apply a little bit of matte varnish over the top just to get the shine off of the paper and to matte them down and seal them in place. Now obviously, if you were to leave your spray varnish to the last step, this is when you could do it. What I'm going to do then is to go ahead and base them, and I've done a couple of videos on basing, so I am going to gloss over that. I'll just pop the recipe in the description. But otherwise, let's get a look at our fella once he is all finished. And so there at last, our American soldier is complete. And that was actually not as taxing as I thought it was going to be. In particular, canvas really came out as a colour that I'm glad to have in the toolbox. That was way more versatile than I thought it would be. Really, really brilliant colour, great for mixing, and also ended up on the base of all places. Really good to have. So in the end, if you do already have a collection, or quite a large collection even, of war paints, then you're probably not going to find a lot of economic value in picking up the entire box of historical paints, because there are a few of them that are repeated. Now, if you haven't got any paints, or you just want to pick up a box that does what it says on the tin, I think then, yeah, you're onto a winner. And the historical specific colours are really, really good. So yeah, they're worth picking up if you do want an alternative way of painting historically accurate miniatures which look cool. I'm dead pleased with that. You can go on the table and go cause a ruckus. So thanks as always goes out to Exit 23 Games for the light and sound equipment, as well as all of my wonderful patrons who are keeping me ticking in paints and glue, which includes my gorgeous producers who are showing up on screen now. Thank you very much for your support, folks. Now, any questions or anything, feel free to drop them in the comment box below. My Blue Sky and Instagram are both linked down there too. So, thank you very much for your time today. It was a long one, folks. I appreciate it. And you all enjoy the rest of your day.